the entire enterprise of this open primary initiative is based on exactly 0 data.
Jake, how are you?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastically. We've made it here.
We made it.
I got connected with you because you are dealing with ranked choice voting, open primaries. You have done a lot of work to try to understand what ranked choice voting is and what open primaries are, and if there is benefit. There's a large push by, for instance, the Take Back Idaho group and a lot of other people saying, hey, we should have ranked choice voting, which Idaho had until I think 2012. Is that accurate?
No, it's not. No.
Okay.
We had what's called an open primary.
Excuse me. And these are different things.
These are different
ranked
things,
choice voting and open primaries. My apologies.
And I'll get into that.
Great.
I'll give you that nuance here.
So but the bottom line is the way we run elections now in the state of Idaho has not always been the way elections were run in the state of Idaho. There has been some changes.
Yes.
There have been some changes in recent years, but there's a big push towards, hey, ranked choice voting. There's going to be a big one. Just tell me, go, the whole thing.
Well, here's the big takeaway. The open primary initiative is an extraordinarily expensive, entirely disruptive solution that is in search of a problem. I have a lot of problems with it. First of all, it is not an open primary initiative. It's like if I had a Vespa scooter for sale on Craigslist, and you called me and said, tell me about your scooter. And I said, well, it has a V8. It has 4 wheels. You can put 4 people inside, and there's a trailer hitch on the back. You would say, that doesn't sound a lot like a scooter. I said, no. It's definitely a scooter. So when they say it's an open primary initiative, that is, first of all, that's a misnomer. Because up until 2012, we did have an open primary.
And what's a proper open primary? Because you're saying what they're proposing is not an open primary.
Yeah.
So what is an open primary?
Okay, what they are proposing is a jungle primary, and I'll tell you what the difference is. And that's
wild.
That
God
freaks
bless
you
it.
out, right?
No,
So
I mean, I'm very tuned in right now.
And an open primary means that the parties, the Democrat Party, the Republicans, the Constitution, whoever else, they have their list of candidates. And all of these parties have what we call a right to association. If I'm a Republican, I have a right to be a Republican, and the Republican Party has a right to exist and to have its own rules and its own regulations, essentially, right? An open primary, and this is how it was up until 2012, you would walk into a polling place on the second or the third Tuesday in May when we have our primaries, and they would ask you, which ballot do you want? And you would say, I want the Republican ballot, or I want the Democrat ballot, or whatever. So you'd get one ballot with one party's candidates. Then you would go in and you would vote. I couldn't vote on more than one ballot. That is an open primary because it doesn't require pre-registration.
Understood. So an open primary, just the basic definition is you get to select on the day of your...
Well, no, I would take it a step. An open primary means that there is no pre-registration requirement.
Okay, great. Go from there.
So this is a jungle primary. Because what they will do is they will take all of the candidates, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, everybody else, and they will put them on one ballot all together. To give you an example, in 2016, when our friend Kamala Harris was elected to the U.S. Senate, on the California primary for her race, there were 34 candidates. Okay, that is a jungle primary. Because in that system, the top 2 candidates in the primary proceed to the generals. That's why in California you have... Generally, for statewide offices, you can only vote for a Democrat or another Democrat, right?
Sure.
So like in her, I bring up Kamala Harris because she's obviously in the news right now. You know, she ran against Loretta Sanchez for the U.S. Senate, and they were both Democrats because they were the top 2 vote getters in the primary among 34 candidates, okay? So that is a jungle primary. So that's... First of all, that's
so if we apply that, and again, let's try to focus specifically on this. So let's take for instance, Ada County Commissioner. We just had our primary. There were 4, I think Area 2. There were 4 Republicans running, and I think 2 Democrats, and I think there were 6 people total. Don't quote me, but I know there were 4 Republicans for sure. Okay. Tom Daley came out as the winner in that Republican 4-person race, and Tom Daley will advance onto the general. Whoever won the Democratic between those two, that person will advance. And then it will be Tom and that Democratic person going against each other. So what you're saying is an open primary would be, I don't have to register Republican or Democrat, and I can show up to the polling place and say, hey, I would like to vote for which Democrat I want. I would like to vote for which Republican I want. I only get to pick one. And the jungle primary you're saying is you just walk in and you have 6 people and the top 2 move on. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
Yeah, no, in this, what they're proposing, the top 4 move on. Because then you get to the ranked choice voting, which is another thing, and that is whoever the top 4 vote getters were in the primary among the sea of candidates, they proceed to the general election ballot.
Okay. So instead of but I am correct that it's like, okay, these are the top 6, or these are the 6, and then the top 4 of those 6 move on.
Yes.
Okay. So that's bad in your mind.
Yeah, I have the biggest bone to pick I have with the entire exercise is that the entire enterprise of this open primary initiative is based on exactly 0 data. If you go to the open primary website, there are no data points that demonstrate why this is good, why it's bad, what will happen, talk about voting patterns. And the reason why that's an issue is because there is no better or more data-rich endeavor than elections. If you go to the Secretary of State's website...
Oh, he's great.
Well, yeah, anywhere, there is so much wonderful election data, right? But the Open Primary Initiative, they have 1 data point on their entire thing. And they're saying there are 300,000. I'll show you right here. It says our closed primary prevents nearly 300,000 Idahoans from participating in some of our most important elections. That's their claim. That's wrong. First of all, there are 266,000 unaffiliated voters in the state of Idaho, not 300,000. And that constitutes the entire data set for which they are making this entire enterprise.
Okay, so let's take a step back here. Okay, so this has been the criticism of the existing system that I've heard as well. So the Idaho is growing. Okay, we have that. Idaho is becoming more red. We have that. This is all on the Secretary of State's website. Mm-hmm. But what we also are seeing is this increasing party of the middle, the unaffiliated, that's saying, hey, I'm not Democrat, but I don't agree with the Republican platform, and so I'm going to be unaffiliated. So say you have a conservative person who's like, yeah, look, I'm conservative, but I don't believe in defunding all higher education. Or look, I'm conservative, but I don't believe that we should eliminate exceptions for rape and incest in abortion law. Like, I'm conservative, but whatever, right? Sure. So they go unaffiliated. And then in the primaries, that unaffiliated group does not have the capacity to cast a vote for a Republican or a Democrat. So when those 2 parties advance to the general and the unaffiliated voter then can come in and select one or the other, they may feel that they are, a lot of people say that the primary elections in Idaho are the actual elections. They function very much as the general election because the majority of the time the Republican, the more conservative candidate, is going to win in the general election. So the actual election, people talk about getting primaried. They're like, this person won the primary, 99% chance that person's going to win the general. So people fight over the primary. Yes,
that's right. But I think you are falling into the same trap that the open primary people want you to fall in.
Oh, I'm not saying I know this for sure. I'm just saying this is what I've heard from people.
That what you've heard from people is the trap.
Okay, so what's the trap?
The trap is giving these 300,000 unaffiliated voters, 266,000 unaffiliated voters, some degree that they are ardently interested in participating in our elections, but they're not. They don't vote. They don't vote in primaries. They vote in generals on occasion. But the open primary folks have done a wonderful job of spinning. It's the oldest trick in the leftist playbook. And that is you either invent or you identify some victim class, okay? In their mind, these 300,000 poor, pitiful, unaffiliated voters are victims of this system, okay? But they're not. They're mostly people who just don't vote. And they never will vote in a primary election. And they don't even know they're unaffiliated. Let me
wait. And first off, how do you know that?
You want to have a hard data point for that?
I'd appreciate a hard data point.
I will give you a hard data point.
And I just want to be clear here. So it sounds like what the information you've given me is not that they're conveying, hey, these people are being abused. It's that, hey, these people don't have the capacity, whether they take it up, whether they engage with it or not, they don't have the capacity to engage in the primary election, which most people agree is the election where whoever wins.
I would say that they have all the capacity. They just don't do it.
What do you mean?
What I mean is talk to your friends and neighbors and say, hey, who did you vote for in the primary? And many of them look at you and say, in the what? In the primary election that was in May. Remember when you were driving around in early May and you saw all those campaign signs?
That's my friends and neighbors. So, like I'm talking about, I'm
not
saying,
my friends and neighbors, right?
Well, that somebody not knowing is definitely different than saying I actually was not able to vote because I'm an unaffiliated, and the structure of Idaho voting, the election system right now does not allow me to make a decision.
Well, let me get you to a hard data point.
Let's go hard data point.
Okay, so there are 266,000 unaffiliated voters in the state. These are people who say they're not Democrats, they're not Republicans.
Yeah.
I'm independent. I
talked to one today.
I'm my own man. Okay.
Sure.
And
woman.
In the 2022, in 2022, there was an election for U.S. Senator. This is the most recent hard data we have. Okay. Mike Crapo won that election with 60.68% of the vote. Okay. If there are 260,000 unaffiliated voters, there was a candidate in that election named Scott Cleveland. And he had a visible campaign. He had put up yard signs all over the place. He had radio ads. He was out there and he was very public with his campaign. Most independent candidates never really do anything. But he was very, very vocal. His signs all said, Scott Cleveland, independent conservative. Okay. Sure. So you would think, here is their moment. All these unaffiliated voters, this is their moment. Like there's an independent guy who's legitimate, who is like, he can put a sentence together. He seems smart. This is going to be our guy. How many votes did Scott get in the general election, do you think? Of those 260,000 unaffiliated voters who say, I'm not Republican, I'm not Democrat, Scott's our guy, how many people voted for him?
I don't know, but you're going to have to come back and justify I'm not this or this, so whoever de facto runs as independent has to be my guy. That's a logical step that I don't think anybody's taking. They're just saying, I do not agree with this. I don't agree with either of these platforms in whole, so I do not want to register as either of these parties. That does not mean that they are stating by registering as unaffiliated that they will actually vote for whoever runs as an independent.
Right. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying if there is...
Okay, how many votes did he get?
If there's a moment, he got 49,000 votes.
Great. So that
8%.
So the unaffiliated voters did not like that guy.
They didn't like that guy, and I would tell you that we're ascribing way too much desire and passion with this 266,000 people who are unaffiliated.
Hang on, I'm not entirely following you here, because what I hear people saying is, hey, the structure of our election precludes this body of people from participating in what we predominantly agree is the most important election, which is the primary.
Right.
That's what I hear people saying. And what I hear you saying is these people don't care. And I'm not arguing with either one. I'm just saying neither one of you are addressing the same point. One person saying the structure of these elections is fundamentally deficient if we consider that this is a really important thing. And you're saying, they don't eat the tuna anyway. Why are we buying the tuna? And the answer, of course, would be we should have an election system that allows participation, whether or allows for it in the event that somebody feels compelled. Whether or not they engage in that, the idea is, hey, look, that's their right.
Well, let me take this out. Let me throw another way of thinking about this.
You sure you don't want coffee? This coffee's great. I'm feeling really fired up. This is fantastic. Go.
Currently, if you are an independent candidate in the state of Idaho,
yes,
you proceed directly to the general election ballot. You're not on the primary at all.
Okay.
Right?
I don't know. Are you asking me to confirm?
No, that's true.
Okay, great.
That's the way it is.
Great.
Like Scott Cleveland didn't have to do a primary.
Great.
He's straight on the election ballot. In this system, the independents compete with the Republicans and the Democrats and the Libertarians and everybody else for those spots on the general election ballot. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. So So,
So
so Tom Daley, the Democrat, and then whoever's the independent for Ada County commissioner, they all go in, and there are 3 of them on the general election ballot, and they're competing for one spot amongst, those other people.
Sure.
Great.
In this new system, the way that people kind of vote, that way people actually vote, you would probably never see an independent candidate on that, or an unaffiliated, nonpartisan candidate on that general election ballot. Because most people are going to vote for the Republican or the Democrat, especially people who vote in primary elections, which is like between 24 and 27% of registered voters participate in primary elections. And that's the way it's been for a very long time.
What percent of unaffiliated participate in primary elections?
Well, whatever.
0%.
Whatever.
Wait, am I screwing that up?
They don't have. Well, they don't have to participate because they're
because their candidate goes directly.
Yeah.
I was just making a bad joke. Jack.
Oh,
God, man,
sorry,
come on,
sorry.
stick with me here. Yeah. So I see what you're saying, which is, hey, look, they likely would not. Right. The independent would likely never even make it to the top 4 or top 2, whatever it is. Right. And again, whatever number it is.
They wouldn't make it there. So if we're trying to protect these unaffiliated voters to give them the capacity to vote for nonpartisan candidates, we're not a nonpartisan candidate. It's never going to sniff the general election ballot again. It's over for them.
So let me ask you this. If that's the case, why are people that are fighting for independence arguing that this is a superior system?
That is the great question.
Well, it mustn't be that they don't agree with you. And again, I don't know.
I don't
but
know.
Obviously, if they're like, okay, it's reality that if this comes to pass, no independent candidate would see the light of day in November.
Never.
They're like, that's a great idea. Let's do that in the name of independence.
In the name of independence. So that's why I say you create a victim class, and then you say, oh, we must rush to help these people.
What do you mean the victim class? I'm not following you. And by the way, I'm very familiar with Marxism, proletariat, bourgeoisie, within environmentalism, within the whole thing.
The entire open primary initiative argument is based around these 300,000 people who are shut out of the process.
Yeah.
Which I fundamentally disagree with. I don't think they're shut out at all. I think that if they want to vote in a primary, they can register and vote in a primary. If they want to vote in the general, they can vote in the general.
Let me ask you this: what's the problem then? If you're like, hey, look, and
I don't know. I'll go ahead. Sorry.
No. I'm with you. I'm going to make a gross assumption and say you're a conservative guy and you're a registered Republican. Don't confirm or deny that. Okay. Let's just say, for argument's sake, not putting you on the spot at all. If that's true, okay, my fictitious example, what does it matter then? If you're saying, hey, look, right now as it stands, independents go straight to the general. They have a chance of victory.
Yeah.
And if you're saying if this, jungle primary, as you put it, comes to pass, they will never see the light of day, and it's still going to be the Republican anyway. So first off, where's the victim there? Because that would literally be like them shooting themselves in the foot. And 2, why is that bad? Right? Because the Republicans, then it would make sense to me. It's like, okay, well, if conservative people recognize this, if this is reality, they're like, let's go. Well, they'll never make it. This is like,
I know
God, Christmas came early.
Right. That is the big, I have asked myself again and again and again, who is better off if this system is in place? And I don't know. I don't know who is better off in the long run. I don't know what it actually changes in the long run, and there is absolutely no data that can demonstrate that. What I do know is that that Reclaim Idaho, who is behind this, their whole thing is they like to make big claims that are kind of charged with language. Like if you on their website it says, I'll look at this again. It's on the banner. It says, gives power back to the people, not party elites. Okay, so if I were to ask you, who is a party elite?
Dorothy Moon.
Okay.
That's not a criticism. Okay. She's just like the top of the party, right?
She's the chair of the party.
Great.
Right. So in their mind, they think there are these party elites, and that at somewhere on a snowy mountaintop in Idaho, we meet around a big dark conference table.
I thought it was a spot in Coeur d'Alene. No? Okay.
And we decide who are going to be the candidates and who's going to win all the elections, right? That's kind of this dark picture. When you say the word party elite, that's what you think, right? And I can guarantee you that is not the case. There is no group of party elites who runs around selecting candidates and manipulating elections and getting stuff through.
Okay, let me ask you about this then.
Yeah.
Okay. You live in Eagle?
Meridian.
Okay. Great. Let's say you and I live in Eagle, which neither of us do. We both would have experienced a state party coming in to influence our local mayoral election if we lived in Eagle, which is what happened. And so I don't think that by people saying party elites, they're saying necessarily that these people are like horrible Skeksis style from like the Dark Crystal, like, meh. But they are saying that, hey, the statewide party has a large degree of funding, right? It has a large degree of resources. It also has the ability to back one candidate over another. And we actually saw that play out on a local level, which, and again, I'm not an Eagle resident, you're not an Eagle resident. So like, I was just watching it like, wow, this is wild. Because again, you had two very, very conservative people running for mayor of Eagle, and the statewide party came down and fully backed and endorsed one. So I absolutely would not call that manipulation. I would not call that them selecting the candidate. Obviously, there is a degree of selection and that when they back a candidate, right? They're like, they have our backing.
Yeah, they
say like
they have some communication resources,
right? Which is why the when I had Brandon Durston here recently, he was saying that the essentially precinct committee men have the capacity to remove somebody from ballot, and there was a disagreement with people in Secretary of State over that. So I just want to be clear.
Yeah, that's a question that's up for great debate, and also a question that is there's no consensus among Republicans with regard to where that occurs.
It does appear that there's a consensus among those that run our elections that's not the case. But again, like if Secretary of State Phil McGrain wants to come in again and explain that, that's fine. But the point is, I think when people talk about party elites, they talk about that scenario where it's like you have people at the top of a party who can steer resources and back individuals, and they will do that in local elections for their guy, right? Which is what we saw. And I think that's what people are worried about. Now, again, neither one of us are Eagle voters.
Maybe, but let me give you two recent counterexamples to that. Because I disagree with the notion, first of all, having been involved with the Republican Party for a long time, we can give them the notion that they are much more organized and capable, and that they manipulate things much more than they do. But I don't find that to be the case.
And I just want to be clear. I'm not saying they manipulated anything. Right. Like I'm being very clear. They did offer resources and backing to one of the Eagle mayoral
influence
candidates.
An election, right?
Well, not influence in any kind of inappropriate or shady way.
Right.
Right. Like there was no foul play.
Right. Yeah.
It's, hey, there's more funding or more resources.
It's all public record.
Right. Like I don't think the Republican Party did anything out of their purview. Okay. What I am saying is, you did see a state party come down to try to get an individual in a 40,000 person city mayor election to win, right? Like that's it.
Okay.
So, again, what you were saying, two counterexamples.
I'll give you a couple counterexamples for that. I'm in Meridian. I live in District 20. There was my current senator is Chuck Winder. Who's the pro tem of this. He's the leader of the Idaho State Senate right now. He got beat in the primary by a guy who was unknown and had
Kaiser,
had very little resources. He went out there and just knocked doors, talked to people, ran a gumshoe election, and won by a very small margin. So if the party were, if the party were to bring to bear all these this group of elites out there were willing to come in and really push the scale for either candidate, you would think that a group of party elites would be able to keep the leader of the Senate in his spot in a primary election against an unknown candidate, right?
Well, I mean, there was a lot going on in that. There was a lot going on in that election, as you recall. I mean, with the dozens and dozens, and like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of mailers going out.
From that pro marijuana group out of Virginia. right?
Well, there actually, speaking with Secretary of State McGreen, there were several different PACs. One, Fondue King out of North Carolina was funding this like mass push against Chuck Winder. And when they got a hold of him, the guy didn't even know who Chuck Winder was. But obviously, Chuck Winder and Mike Moyle really put themselves on the line against, standing up for Idaho's capacity to decide what they want to do with abortion law within the state. And, then sued the federal government.
Right.
So they really put themselves on the line, and in my mind, really made themselves a target for groups that are not interested in that kind of thing. So there were a lot of things going on. I don't know to what degree that affected it, but I do know people were sending me videos, and I actually did a video of it, of like dozens and dozens and dozens of mailers and insane lies and whatnot about Chuck.
I received those as well.
Great. So
wild,
man.
I'm very familiar with it.
Did you see the Fauci marionette one?
Yeah.
Where it was like,
I know, it's madness.
I was like, this is insane.
It's madness. But I think to myself, if there were a group of party elites who were, in charge of selecting candidates, couldn't we have kept Senator Winder in place?
Well, it depends if they wanted Senator Winder. I think he was also roundly criticized by some of the Republican Party, some of the party.
So that demonstrates there's obviously a diversity of opinion within, and I saw that as well. I mean,
wait, diversity of opinion where?
Within the party itself. I mean,
sure.
I mean, it's not this uniform, top down. We're going to do this thing and that's it.
Well, there's diversity within the Republican Party, but there's not diversity within the GOP control. That's not reality. Like Dorothy Moon's at the top of it, and they have control that party. Like for instance, I got invited to 2 election parties for the primaries, and I was like, there are 2 of them? What do you mean? And one was at like the Riverside or something?
Okay.
Yeah, and then there was another one at like Topgolf. I'm like, wait, I thought everybody partied together on the,
No. Yeah. And that to me demonstrates that there is a range of options, and the resources are spread, and there's a lot. It just works against this notion that there is that there is an organized group of elites who have a lot of power, or an undue amount of power. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, but and I got you. I understand what you're saying. To be clear, though, there is an organized party that starts with like precinct committeemen all the way up. And those people take orders from the top down.
I would taking orders, I think, would be a very generous way of saying that. I think that the party probably gives direction. But I wouldn't say that Dorothy Moon has, if she says "thus it shall be," that it all falls into place. That is definitely not the case.
What about her thing with like "hell has no fury like a chairwoman scorn"? You remember that? Well, that was in Coeur d'Alene, wasn't it? Yeah, that was like a couple of years ago. I don't know. I thought that was a great line.
I'm not saying they're powerless. I'm just saying that we can have this notion in our minds that they have a lot more top-down authority than they have. I've been in those central committee meetings, and I can tell you for a fact that when any proposal comes up, there is a lot of division, and trying to get all the party to point in one direction I've never seen it happen.
Understood. So, Jake, here's my question then. If this is true, which is like, listen, we do a jungle primary, the unaffiliated or independent never makes it to the primary, right? If we do a jungle primary, or excuse me, never makes it to general. If we do a jungle primary, the unaffiliates aren't going to vote anyway. If we do a jungle primary, it will have more Republican representation anyway in the general. If all of that's true, why aren't you for the jungle primary? Like, this sounds great. Because, if you're an imaginary Republican, as we've said. For me, and I am a partisan Republican. Okay, great. I'm okay saying that. Great.
I'm out.
I didn't want to put you on the spot.
I'm out. Okay. Just because I'm a dedicated partisan, so to speak, doesn't mean I don't appreciate and value a diversity of opinion. I actually would like to have the Democrats to have somebody to vote for, because I think it's important. I want them to turn up and participate, even if I disagree with them.
Are you saying the Democrats or the unaffiliated?
Well, even the Democrats. Think about where I am in District 20. If there were 6 candidates, say, for a legislative seat, there would probably be 0 Democrats on the ballot.
Why?
Because if you have 6 if the in the general primary, there are so few Democrats who vote in that primary altogether that you'd have 4 Republicans who would proceed to the primary or proceed to the general. On the flip side, in a place like, in central Boise in District, 16 or something, where the Republicans are much weaker, you might not have a Republican on the general election ballot. I mean, it cuts in very weird ways that I think are completely unnecessary.
Okay, but isn't that like the will of the people then? If it's like, hey, we gave you a shot, you guys either didn't come out in mass or were insufficient. Like, here's a question for you.
Yeah.
I was on the phone today trying to wrap my head around the whole thing, what we have now,
Sure.
what this is proposing, how it would affect. And it's like, people are getting their shot one way or another. So you're saying, look, I'd like the Democrats to have a shot in the general election. But you and I both know it's in 20, it's going to be the Republican, right? So it's like they either get their shot in the primary or they get their shot in the general, right? Like the people keep saying like, well, I want them to have their opportunity at this point. And it's like where I sit, and again, dumb Matt, I don't know. It's like, I just want to make sure everybody has a shot at some point. That's all that matters to me, whether it's the primary or the general. And people keep saying it should be the primary. And then some people say it should be the general. It's like, did they get a shot? Did we get a shot? And did like we upregulate and go from there?
Yeah, I can see that point of view, but I believe that there is, the parties are important in our American system of government. That they're intact. There's no way to separate our system of governance from the parties, right? And parties have the right to association. If I think I'm a Republican and I voted and I am a registered Republican, I should have the right to go vote for my Republican, who's going to represent me in the general. Somebody who's unaffiliated or a Democrat should not also have the ability to vote for my Republican candidates because they are Democrats. They vote for their party. They have theirs. We have ours. And when you get to the general election ballot, we want to have a good blend of candidates.
You want to have the best Democrat, you want to have the best Republican as selected by the Democrats, as selected by the Republicans, and the independent goes in.
Yeah, and that was a big debate when we did this in 2012 when we went to what we call the closed primary.
Sure.
Is that the Republicans said we have a right to association, and they actually sued the Secretary of State to get to close the primary. I didn't like that at that point, but there's, I liked the system before it was the open primary where you didn't have to pre-register. You could just show up and grab whatever ballot you wanted to in the moment. I like that system because I think it's, it's easier to vote. But
doesn't that go against the right of association?
Not necessarily, because when I grab that Republican ballot, I am voting for Republicans.
But you're not registered as a Republican.
Not at that point. I'm not.
So then you have somebody who's not a registered Republican who is in fact selecting the Republican candidate.
And that was the rationale that was used to close the primary, to make it so you had to pre-register.
But what I'm saying is you're saying we should have the right to association, but then you're also saying I didn't mind the way it was before, where I could just show up on the day,
right,
select who I wanted to vote for, which eliminated the right to association.
Yeah, and that was the rationale behind closing the primary altogether.
Gotcha. And again, today you think that's good?
What's good?
The right to association, which is Republicans vote for Republicans. Okay, great.
Yeah,
great.
I don't mind the system now, and I think that if you look back, if you look at the historical data, in 2010 it was like between 24 and 26% of registered voters voted in the primary.
Great.
We closed the primary. The first closed primary was in 2012, and the number was almost exactly the same, within like less than 1 percentage point. So the number of people who actually voted in a closed primary was essentially the same.
Here's a philosophical question for you: if you don't use it, should you lose it? Right? I don't know what rights. Like, pick a right. Right? Like, I have a right to bear arms.
Sure.
And if I don't, let's say I own 5 guns. I'm like, but you got a right to own 10 guns, but I only own 5. So if you don't use it,
if you don't buy 5 more guns, you can't have any.
Right. Like, I have a right to own an assault rifle. Should we tolerate an argument that says, hey, Matt doesn't buy an assault rifle anyway. Let's fucking yank that. Like, he doesn't even care. He doesn't even care. He doesn't have one. He's not going to get one.
But we're not.
His wife would kick his ass. Like, That's a question that, and again, it's like, this is a philosophical question, right? Like, this is a principle. Should we have an argument about the rights of somebody and instilling those rights independent of whether or not they would use them, or should we take into consideration usage and actual participation when giving somebody a right?
Well, I would say that an unaffiliated voter, I don't think they're losing any right at all. I would say that actually cuts harder the other direction. That if I am a Republican and all of a sudden I have my right to vote in a Republican primary is now compromised, that is eroding my right. I'm not taking away the right of another person.
And you feel this erodes a Republican's right to vote in a primary?
Or a Democrat or whoever else you have, right?
How so?
Well, if you think about if I'm a strategic voter, okay, I would go in on that primary ballot and I would vote. And if I know the Republicans might proceed, I'm going to vote for the craziest, most absurd Democrat I can, knowing that that person would not stand a ghost of a chance in a general election.
Instead of just voting for the guy that you think has a high chance of winning that you like?
Yeah.
Wait, so if you and I are besties, I know I just met you today, but I'm your best friend, and I'm like, bro, I'm running, I'm a crush. And you're like, God, Matt, you are going to crush. This is going to be great. You're going to be the best thing ever. Yeah. And I go in and I register as a Republican and I'm on that ballot. And like the whole day goes by. We're at the election party. I'm sitting there with like my stupid champagne flute. I don't like champagne, but like I'm there and I'm like, hey, how good was it to vote for me today? How sick was that? And you're like, actually,
I would say to you,
I voted for that idiot on the Democratic ticket and I dropped my champagne because I'm shocked. And so I'm like, wait a minute, you didn't, I'm your guy. Then you're saying that you would tell me.
I would say to you, I'm helping you because in the general election, you're going to have to run against that guy and he's the easiest one to beat.
But if everyone does that, then literally the worst person gets upregulated. Like how many people would do that?
I don't know. But
like, there's that. What I'm saying is like, this is a principle that I've heard this from other people. Yeah. And it's like, who would do that? If I'm your BFF and I'm like, hey, come on, bro.
I don't think very many people would. I don't think cross voting happens very often. I think it does happen, but it's much less common than some would have you believe. What I'm saying is that a jungle primary offers that capacity, right?
Sure. Okay.
And do we want that? I don't know. Do we want? I don't want that.
Right.
But there, aside from that, there are a lot of deeply mechanical things that are different about not just the open primary, which we've talked about exclusively.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the ranked choice.
Let's do that. And again, thank you for explaining the jungle primary. Like that's the best explanation and conversation I've ever had about it. Well, awesome.
Well, let me just finish with this, if that's okay. Because Kamala Harris is in the news. There was an article I found.
Can we just take a brief moment to appreciate how she went from the most disliked politician, like in the history of like since we had chiefs and tribes and like popularity measures of those in charge, like she went from like the least popular person in the history of history to like the savior of the country. And all of a sudden, every video of her saying ridiculous, full stop, like those type, they're all gone. Like you can't even find them. And now it's just who's the wokest. You don't have to be the wokest, but you need to be woker. More woke is better than less woker or something.
Well, she benefited from a jungle primary. Because in the 2016 election, she was in that jungle primary. There were 34 candidates in the primary.
Jay, hang on. Have you ever voted in a California election?
No, I haven't.
Okay, let me be clear here. All right, you go in.
Okay.
You got your ballot. You got your thing, and you're like 14, or you're trying to research beforehand. You're like 14 people. Like who are these people? And you're going through and reading. You're like, half of them are prostitutes. Now, like I'm not joking. Because what they do is they utilize the election system to get their name and their picture out there. And they're like escort, exotic dancer. Like this is real. And I asked a friend about it. He's like, oh yeah, lawyers used to do this too, because you couldn't, it used to be that you couldn't advertise as an attorney in California. So lawyers would constantly run for public office to get their name and get
Just
their
have their
marketing
name
out
on there. Right.
Yeah. And if they engage in a debate or something like that, but they're like, I'm an attorney. Like I support people who, in employment law, and like the employment in California is terrible and they're getting taken advantage of, and all of a sudden my phone's ringing off the hook because I was on like TV. So like, I guarantee there were not 34 people that actually wanted to do that.
Absolutely.
There were people that were
totally agree.
using it as like a marketing mechanism.
I totally agree. The problem that introduces...
That's how crazy California is. God
Well,
bless it.
Well, I mean, here's an article from 2016 from the LA Times. It says the glut of candidates presents a serious challenges in designing a ballot that makes sense to voters while also adhering to California law. It says, okay, so here's a data point. In early April, a team of ballot design experts joined election officials in Santa Cruz County to test a variety of side-by-side options because there were 34 candidates.
How are we talking about Santa Cruz County, Jake?
Let me just tell you this.
Tell me.
Okay, so he said, in trial runs, they found that no matter how they tinkered with the format, more than 1/3 of the mock ballots were marked with an overvote. So
I don't know what that means.
What that means is, in the list of candidates, somebody voted for more than one candidate. And an overvote is that ballot is discarded.
Great.
Because you voted for more than one person.
Okay, so there are a lot of stoned people in Santa Cruz County. I could have told you that. I could have told you that right away.
But look what happened here in Idaho. And I mean, just looking backwards in 2022, we talked about that U.S. Senate race.
Yeah.
There would be 13 candidates in that Senate race in the open primary. And then, you have that the ballot would be colossal, very long, right? And you have to go through and you have to sort that out. It's a system that is very prone to error and overvoting.
Wait, I'm confused. So the Santa Cruz County example, you're saying that was somebody who was doing a jungle primary mechanism, and they had 1/3 of the voters that didn't understand the instructions and then screwed up the voting.
Yeah, and well, 1/3 of the ballots were thrown out because the people in their test, they were trying to figure out how we put that many candidates on the ballot without confusing everybody and making it a huge mess. And it was very difficult. So, and if you think that, we always think, oh, that couldn't happen here in Idaho. But in 2022, if we look back and we had created a ballot, it would be like 24 inches long. Once we list all the candidates and for all the primary and all the parties on one ballot, it's very long, right? It makes voting much more long and much more difficult altogether. Just as a practical matter, when I have to go in and I have to select one out of a huge list, and then I go to the next office, and then I have to select one out of another huge list. Then it's just kind of like it's a lot. In technology we call that cognitive load. Like how much do you have to think about when you look at a sheet of paper?
I was actually just going to ask you that. How much do you think when you go to vote? Because I would imagine a man of your research capacity is not thinking this is merely a clerical procedure where you're like, all right, I want to vote for Matt Todd. Probably if we were besties, and I'm voting for Matt Todd and I'm voting for this guy. Where's Matt's name? Like you're not doing math problems or conceptualizing like the merits of people unless you're like, man.
You're not, but not everybody is Matt Todd who kind of knows everybody on there.
No, but there's no information on those ballots, right? Like it's just like this is the name. There's not even when you talk about cognitive load, it's like the gears aren't turning. You're literally just reading names off. There's nothing to consider other than and if you don't know who you're voting for, they all look the same. If you do know who you're voting for, you just find that one person. If there were like paragraphs, oh my God, good luck with that.
Well, that would be impossible. But
right.
What I'm saying is what we have become accustomed to in the state of Idaho is, voting is pretty straightforward because you have this list and you have this list, and it fits on the front of one sheet of paper, and you can get through it. Yeah. Right. In a jungle primary, that's not the case. But we
digress.
We digress. Let's
and again, that's the primary issue. And now we have the ranked choice voting.
We have the ranked choice voting issue. Now,
all right.
Now, in ranked choice voting, you have a scenario where in any given race, whoever the top 4 candidates were, they proceed to the general.
Great. So we have the jungle primary, 4 people go to the general.
Yeah, and then at that scenario, you're asked to rank your votes 1 through 4. I want this person the most, this person the second most, this person the third, and this person last. Right, regardless of what party they're all blended together.
Right.
So, in that scenario, the thing that is very concerning to me about it more than anything, and we talked about this before we came on air, is software.
Sure.
Right. There's not a software system anywhere on planet Earth that is not subject to bugs and failure. Right. I mean, Delta Airlines learned that, 3 weeks ago when they had that $500 million mistake,
They
right?
didn't. Wasn't Southwest Airlines the only
Yeah.
one because they hadn't upgraded their software
Yeah.
since like the 80s.
Yeah,
They're
'cause
like, nah, this ain't broken. We ain't fixing it.
I think they all run on Windows 98, all those airline computers. So,
God, that's great.
right.
Anyway, keep going.
So in software we have, you'll like these. You like
Oh yeah.
in software you have complexity and then you have risk, which are two different things. Like my 11-year-old loves to play the game Brawl Stars on his iPad, right? It's a very complex platform and software system to deploy to run this game, right? But it's very low risk. Like if they introduce a bug into Brawl Stars, the worst that can happen is you have a whole bunch of 10 and 11-year-olds who are upset for a day until they fix it. Okay. If Tesla doesn't have the right software in their self-driving cars, somebody gets hit and gets killed, right?
And that's a marriage of risk and complexity.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So in a software platform that is asked to read, scan, and then do what's called the instant runoff in the ranked choice voting system, that is very complex and ultra risky. And
How is it complex?
it's complex because you have a very long sheet of paper. You have to think about this. In 2026, in any given legislative district in the state of Idaho, there's going to be between 15 and 18 races between, right? So you're going to have to go in and mark between 68 and 72 bubbles to vote.
Right. First, second, third, fourth. First, second, third, fourth. First, second,
it's going to take a while.
Sure.
First of all.
Or do you just do first and second?
You could just do first and second or just first.
Okay, great.
Whatever,
Right.
But in that scenario, then we have to scan all those things, and then it gets put into a software platform that has to score and then determine the vote.
And is that a complex scoring system?
It's very complex. It's not the scoring system itself isn't super complex. What's complex is reading the ballots correctly. And, if a ballot is, 22 inches long, it has to go through that scanner.
And
not miss.
Do those ballot scanning machines not have the capacity to scan like right now they're, let's say 14 inches and like, hey, look, if you go past 18 inches, things get weird.
They could scan a 40-foot document.
Okay.
Right. The thing that's difficult about it is that if there is a very close election or something that comes into question, it is nigh impossible to do a hand audit of those elections.
Why is that?
Because you have to look at the race, then you'd have to go through and especially if you have two races that are in question on the same ballot, you have to put them in different boxes, and it would be an incredibly arduous task to hand audit a ranked choice voting election.
So it would take more manpower to do a hand audit. It's not like you could hand out instructions very clearly to the person counting, like, hey, this is how you do it. Do you understand? Because you get deputized, right? When you're doing these things, which I found out, which I thought was awesome. I'm definitely going to volunteer for elections so I can.
I'm not saying it's impossible. It is degrees of magnitude more difficult than it is right now.
And so right now they just say, hey, this is a vote for Jake and this is a vote for Matt. And then you just do two different boxes. Whereas if you were like, okay, this person put Jake as first and Matt as second. So that goes, you just have to consider it much more than like A or B. It's not A or B. It's like there's a value system associated.
It's A, B, C, D, and then contingencies on each one. Right. I mean, in WordPress, we call that a taxonomy, right?
Right.
I guess they use that in biology too, where it's just much more complex than it is today. So for my part, when we think about election integrity and making sure we get the results out quickly and we get the results out transparently, that is difficult. Because if we say this is what the software told us, this guy won by 3 votes. Like, oh yeah? You trust the software system?
Should we not?
I don't know. That for me.
Well, this is a question that I have about everybody with elections. They're like, do you and we're just supposed to trust the result. It's like, do you not? And why do you not? Right? Like my phone does things that I could not conceptualize in a million years as a human being. So the idea, it's like, do you trust the software? Yeah, bro. I don't know. I mean, when I send a text message with a video of my kids playing in the backyard to my wife, I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know how it captures a video. I don't know, in space and then I'm in the moon. It doesn't. For me.
So the question is, if an election came down to 0.1%, do we automatically just trust that the software was not buggy or something was missed. I mean,
No, sure. I mean, like, yeah, right. I say we have a threshold, and again, I don't know anything about this, but like, it would make common sense. It's like, hey,
right.
once you pass a threshold of like, if an election's decided by fewer than 50 votes, we do a hand audit, right? And there are a lot of counties and voting areas in the state of Idaho that don't have electronic ballot, counters. That there are people already counting one by one, human doing the whole thing. So, yeah, like if you were saying, hey, I would just be more concerned that there's more opportunity for error in both the technology and with the humans. Like, okay, that's fine. I'm just saying, like, I don't think there's any point where we should inherently not believe either party.
I don't believe either. For me, I think that if we are concerned about ensuring that we have, and in Ada County especially, I believe that the humans involved and that the technology systems that are involved do a great job. And when I see an election total, I accept it almost implicitly. That's not a problem for me. This is another animal. This is a new thing that we're going to have to build trust with and figure out. And I don't know that in this environment that putting our elections into a new software platform is a great idea.
Why? What about this environment?
Just the environment. And you've talked to Ada County or county clerks before about the incoming they get, right? Even when they
from what do you mean?
From concerned citizens or people who think that they're manipulating the votes or that there's grift in the system. I mean, it's unending. And I think this platform or doing it this way just creates the opportunity for people to question and to have a lot of consternation about the outcomes of elections. It's greatly multiplied, and I think completely unnecessary.
Gotcha. And again, with the ranked choice voting, this is the idea that you have a selection of people in the general. You have, like, let's say 4 people, right? The top 4 move on from the jungle primary, right?
Right.
And then every person is required, well, if you want to vote to count, you have to vote for, like, this is my number 1. But then people have the opportunity to say, this is my 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? When we have those 4, what has to happen for the election to be over or for it to move on to, like,
whoever reaches 50% first?
50 plus 1 or just 50%?
Oh, 50, yeah, 50 plus 1.
Okay. So if you and I are in there and 2 other random people, if you get 51 plus % of the vote, you win automatically. This is almost identical to what happened in Eagle. Nobody got 51%.
Yeah, there was a runoff, right?
Right. But this would be standard. So you have the 4 people, somebody gets 50 plus 1, it's over. If nobody gets 50 plus 1, then you say, okay, we take the top 2. Yeah?
Right.
Right. So it's whoever had, like, the top 2 number 1 votes cast, correct?
Right.
So then my second, third, fourth
Yeah.
place are irrelevant. It's just like, look, who got the...
No.
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 Okay. So how does this work then?
Okay. So let's say, and this is, again, this is another, think about how long it takes us just to talk this through and figure this out. Right. And now you're going to try to put this on an entire population of voters and say, this is how we're doing it now. Right.
Well, people understand, like, look, rank 1 to 4. Like, they understand that. I'm just trying to understand. Okay, what happens to the second, third, and fourth? Do those have subordinate values or what?
Yeah. So if a candidate gets 40%, right, then we look at everybody who had the fewest number of votes for number 1, like the 4th place guy would drop off.
Okay.
Then you take all the ballots for all the people who voted for the 4th place guy in their first position. Then you say, who was in the second position on that 4th place guy, right?
Oh, interesting.
So then those second place spots essentially get moved into first place, right?
Gotcha.
And so on and so forth until somebody gets 50% plus 1. So in that scenario,
wait, so there's no runoff then? They just categorize, like, first, second, third, fourth, and then.
Well, they call it the instant runoff.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. This is making sense. So you take the guy who has the fewest number 1 votes.
He drops.
And then they take all the people that put, like, let's say Matt was number 4. Like, anybody who voted for Matt, they go to the number 2 spot. And if that number, and then they give all of those votes, they, work them all out. They're like, all right, whoever's in 3rd, that person drops out.
If
Right?
if we're not to the 50% threshold at that
Right.
point.
And so then you just keep dropping people out and reallocating based on what's your second place, what's your third place, what's your fourth place, until one of the candidates gets 50 plus one.
Right.
That's wild. So it's instantaneous.
Yeah, that's why it's called the instant runoff.
Yeah.
So think about this: if you are a I'm sorry, I wasn't on the microphone there.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
If you're a candidate and maybe I'm not the favorite candidate of anybody,
I definitely would not be the favorite candidate. So
but
what am I thinking?
But I can be a solid number 2, right? So when I go knock doors, did you hear that? Would that work?
Yeah.
You can say, "Hey, listen, man, I know I'm probably not your favorite candidate. Will you commit just to vote for me number 2? Just put me in your number 2 spot."
I would not do that ever just for somebody being like, give me silver. It's like, I never want the guy going for silver.
But it's a strategy that can work. It could work.
Okay, work how though? Like what happens?
Because if whoever might have the number 1 vote, right? If the number 1 guy gets 40%, but then 50% of everybody else agreed to put me in the number 2 spot, guess what? I just won. Congratulations.
Wait, you just won. Oh, if the fourth and third place people had put you in number 2, then all of those votes trickle into you.
Yeah.
That's so wild.
I know, it's crazy. This is why I'm saying it's first of all, it's horribly expensive. It's going to cost $40 million to do this.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot. That's we could fix 40 bridges in the state of Idaho.
I feel like we could get up to some trouble with $40 million, Jake.
Well, that is not a negligible amount of money in the state of Idaho. That's a lot of money. It's $40 million. As we just tried to talk through it, it takes a long time to like figure out what the heck this is, because your intuitive human sense is whoever gets the most votes wins. Right? No, but not anymore. It's whoever gets the most votes after we do this a few times, they win. Because even in a runoff election, the candidates drop off, and then I go in, and my choices are no longer A, B, and C, D. It's just A and B, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different exercise. And if it takes this long for us, if it takes us 40 minutes to figure out how ranked choice voting works on a podcast, try to explain that to 1 million voters in the state of Idaho and how this is going to work, and then build trust in that system. Especially for a system that isn't even broken at all. That works very well. And I'll tell you why, because in 2022, we had 32% participation in the primary election, which is the highest it's ever been, by the way. Our participation in primary elections is going up over time, and I think it will continue going up over time. So we are this is over the wrong target. The target isn't to change the rules of the game. The target is to get more people involved in the game. And I think there's a huge, like you mentioned this, there's a huge number of people who don't vote in primary elections just because for whatever reason, it's just not part of their mental furniture. And they're not bad people. They're registered to vote. And if the open primary folks really want to change the game, because we have a list, again, the data shows all of the people who are registered to vote and didn't vote in the primary. Why not spend the millions of dollars that are going into this into doing some outreach to these folks and say, hey, did you know there's a primary election that happens every third Tuesday on even number of years in the state of Idaho? Why don't you go vote, right? And for my part, that is how we change the game, is we get more voices involved in the process. I don't believe, here's the other part of this, I think it's important to know. And this is the data point that we have. Between 2010 and 2012, the number of voters between the open primary and the closed primary did not really change at all. I mean, statistically, it was very small. It was negligible, right? So that didn't really change the game. So it was the same people. The same people voted in the open primary, and then they registered to vote, and then they voted in the closed primary. It's the same group of people. So what's going to happen here is you're going to have the same 32% maybe at the high water mark who are going to participate in this jungle primary. Who are we bringing in new voices? What are we changing? Like, what is the
What's the motivation?
Well,
why spend the 40?
Yeah, why spend $40 million doing this to change a system that is not broken, and we know what the problem is. Do you remember? Do you like the movie Moneyball?
Oh yeah, I met Billy Bean.
Oh, you
He
did?
lived in Danville. I was at game 20. I was in college.
way.
I swear to God, I was a junior in college on the rowing team. Wednesday night, they had Dollar Wednesday, right? And get done with our practice and our rowing. We had a rowing machine's called an ergometer. So we had an erg room where it's like 40 of them, and it was like a dungeon under the stadium.
Wow.
Anyway, so we're there, and my buddy Max we finish our work. I'm like, oh, I'm done. He's like, hey, come to the A's game. I'm like, Max, I ain't got no money for the A's game. He's like, no, it's Dollar Wednesday. I'm like, when are we leaving? He's like, right now. So literally, we jump on BART, which is a block away, go into Oakland, buy 20 hot dogs each because they were $1, and we're in the nosebleed, and we have so many hot dogs between like the 5 people,
and we
there. Just take a whole bucket of onions up to it, and we're there, right? And it was the wildest thing because the A's in that 20th game, the game 20, they were ahead by a lot in like the 5th inning or something, and then who were they playing?
I don't recall.
I can't remember. It was like Seattle or something. Anyway, they started coming back, and then they brought out Koch, who they called the White Devil, and he was like he could throw really hot, but only like 5 pitches, and it was this clincher because they're like, oh no, so he gets burned out, and then they have to bring on another closer, and they finally win. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, but I didn't even know it was game 20. It was like months before I realized the significance of what I was at, and
you had no idea.
I had no idea, and then
you didn't know why the players were all jumping around and having a great time.
Well, they won the game.
Well, I know. That's typically not what happens, right?
Listen, when I tell people that Matt's an idiot, I really I'm not all there. Anyway, yeah, so it was like this cool thing. And then later on, they make a movie out of it, obviously with Brad Pitt. And then his kids, Billy Bean's kids, happen trading at a jiu-jitsu gym that I
and he was
frequent. There. And he was like,
well, do you remember in the movie, they're sitting around the table.
Yeah.
Right. He's got his recruiters. They're talking about
beginning of the movie.
Yeah. This player, he looks good. He has a baseball look.
The ball cracks off the bat. Yeah. It's like all these, like, what does he say?
They're giving all these data or all these
euphemisms and sayings.
Zero data.
Yes.
And then Billy Bean says, if he's a good hitter, why doesn't he hit good?
Yes.
Right. Because he's looking at the data. And then he goes around the table and he says, what's the problem? And this guy, and they don't know what the problem is, right? And then Billy Bean says there's rich teams and there's poor teams. There's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. And we have to compete with these guys, right? So the problem with these guys are over the wrong target. The problem is not the system of voting that we have. It's the number of voters who turn out. I don't see how this addresses that problem at all, because I just don't see it. So if we want to change the outcome, we need to change the participation rates. And the way you change participation rates is by communicating with voters. It's candidates going on, knocking on doors and turning people out. And I would tell you that there's a lot legislative candidates who do a great job if they identify unaffiliated voters who probably agree with them. And they go knock on their door, and 9 times out of 10, they say, will you go register to vote for me? And they say, great, we'll do it. They hand them the registration form, and it's done. It's not a huge exercise. I certainly accept the fact that there are people who feel like they don't have a home with the Republicans or the Democrats. I totally accept that, and I don't have any problem with somebody who says that. But I don't think that's 66,000 people.
What, you mean that you just don't feel like
who just are just so mentally distressed that they can't vote for one, or they can't register in one party or the other?
What do you think it is then?
I don't know. That would be very interesting to find out. But we have some indicators, like in that 2022 election. Right. I mean, if there were a lot of people who really don't like either party, Scott Cleveland would have gotten a lot more votes than he did.
No, but I think you're ascribing a principle to unaffiliated voters that I don't think is actually reflective of their motivations. They just don't like groups. They're like the groups, the tribe, the party, the follow my orders. I don't like that. That doesn't mean they're not going to assess the landscape when the general election comes and says, okay, out of all of these politicians, which do I like the most? That's right. You're saying, and again, you're saying like they're just waiting for their independent candidate. but by the nature of their unaffiliated, they're like, I don't like groups and I don't like being told what to do. So like if somebody shows up, they're like, I'm your guy, I'm the independent. They're like, wrong answer, buddy. Like I'm an independent or unaffiliated specifically. So I don't have somebody showing up telling me you have to vote for me.
Maybe, but that is the data that's available. I just look at the numbers and I try to make sense of what we are seeing and what has happened in past elections and what is happening now.
Sure.
I mean, I can't tell you what exactly. I can't have a crystal ball to tell you exactly what's going on.
Sure.
But that's in my eye test, so to speak. Like our friends in the A's recruiting room talk about the eye test. That's what I see. Is that there are if there is better outreach to voters about what the primary is and how it works, you'll get more party registrations and you'll get more participation.
Gotcha.
Because even still, only 32% are participating. And that's much lower than even the number who are registered, either Republican or Democrat. So we're not even turning out the people who are registered, much less the people who are unaffiliated.
Right.
That should be that's the first, obstacle to tackle, is all these registered Republicans and all these registered Democrats who just don't vote in primaries really ever.
Yeah.
And we know who they are. The data is there.
Yeah, I'm really intent on trying to help people understand how the voting system works, how secure your vote is, how it's not being manipulated, like the MyPillow guy said, by like China and all these things. Like, because at least from my standpoint, you have a whole lot of reasons why people aren't voting. You have apathy, you have disgust, you have frustration, you have ignorance. But you also have lack of faith in voting integrity. And that's a big thing where people are like, if the game is rigged, I don't care.
I'm not going to participate.
Right. And you also have, obviously this is essentially a one-party state. So it's like, what does it matter if you vote for Republican in California? And I hate to bring up California, but I think a lot of people realize it's like, yeah, it's useless. It's useless. Why vote anyway? Because you know who's going to win. That's a real question that people confronted.
Yeah. Well, think about it in California, if they had a system that wasn't a jungle primary, there would be a Republican on every general election race.
Yeah, that wouldn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and throw that one out.
But at least he's there, because in that, again, that Kamala Harris race in 2016, it was her and Loretta Sanchez, who was another Democrat, right? So the Republicans are completely shut out of that race completely, in totality, right? At least their guy is there. And I think there's value in that.
Man, Jake, I appreciate the conversation. Yeah. I have not had an opportunity to sit down and noodle through this stuff with people. There's so much confusion, but like, I get what you're saying. What you're saying makes sense. Like you've explained it, and whether or not, whatever side people land on, right? It's fine. And I'm hopefully going to be able to have somebody who's for the jungle primary and for ranked choice voting come and like, well, Jake said this. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Mm-hmm. But again, I appreciate you coming in and explaining.
I'm happy to do it. It's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
And again, I think I'm not a professional political operative. I'm not paid by anybody.
You and me, baby.
I'm a
no
dad.
Money at this table.
I'm just a dad from Meridian.
I'm just a dad from Meridian.
That's it. So.
God bless it, man. Well, again, thanks for coming in. Let's do a follow-up after all this comes to pass.
I would love to. I'd love to see. Well, first of all, I want this thing to go down in flames, because I think it's unnecessary and it's ridiculously expensive. But if it does happen, then we will deal with it.
Yeah. If it happens, it's okay.
It's not the end of the world.
No, I have the people I've met in this state are just resourceful and like get her done kind of people. Like if the election system changes, okay, like we'll move on with our life. If it stays the same, okay, we're going to move on with our life. Like, let's just not, what I would really like is to not make this like an existential crisis for the state of Idaho. Like, we don't need another existential crisis.
Right.
Like, we can have a disagreement or whatever. Like, there are multiple ways to do things, and some people are proposing a different way. Okay, that's okay. Like, we can handle a change if we need to. Now, whether or not we need to or whether or not it's appropriate, that's up for debate. But if it comes to pass, okay, man, like Idaho will continue to exist. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would like to exist well, because this is where I live. I don't plan on moving. I'm going to fight for what I think is right in the great state of Idaho.
Well, thanks for fighting today. Appreciate you, sir.
Thanks, Matt.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.